The roar of 50,000 voices shakes the stone walls of the Colosseum. Dust rises from the sand, shimmering in the sunlight as the gates creak open. From the shadows, a figure emerges, helmet gleaming, sword in hand, shield heavy at his side. The crowd explodes in cheers, chanting his name, demanding blood. To them, he is a hero, a warrior, a symbol of Roman might. But step closer, and the illusion begins to crack. Beneath the polished armor lies a man whose body is scarred, whose muscles ache from endless drills, whose heart beats not with pride, but with fear. The crowd sees glory. He feels chains. This is the hidden reality of the gladiator. Behind the spectacle that enthralled the Roman Empire were trials unseen by the public eye, trials not of combat alone, but of body, mind, and spirit. The gladiator's life was not simply lived in the arena. It was endured in the training schools, the barracks, and the endless nights before the fight. In the ludus, the gladiatorial schools, men trained like prisoners of war, fed a strict diet of barley and beans, beaten into discipline by Lannister masters, who owned their lives. They lived under constant watch. They slept in cells, not chambers. They rose with the sun to drill, to bleed, to learn how to die for the entertainment of others. Their bodies became weapons, but their souls bore the weight of captivity, even for those who entered the arena willingly. Lured by the promise of fame or coin, the reality was harsh. Once sworn, their oath bound them to endure fire, chains, and death by the sword. They signed away not just their freedom but their humanity, becoming property of the empire's cruelest theater. And the trials did not end with training. Each fight carried more than the risk of death, carried humiliation, manipulation, and the whims of the mob. Victory did not always mean survival, and defeat did not always mean death. A gesture of a thumb could grant mercy or command slaughter, regardless of how bravely a gladiator fought. Their fates rested not in skill alone, but in the appetite of the crowd and the mood of the sponsor. The Romans adored their gladiators, yet despised them too. They cheered their courage, yet scorned their profession as dishonorable. To be a gladiator was to live in a paradox, worshipped as a hero, condemned as a slave. This is the hidden world behind the spectacle, the trials that no audience ever saw, but every gladiator endured. Welcome to the hidden trials of Roman gladiators. To understand the hidden trials of gladiators, we must first understand the world that created them, the Roman Empire, a civilization both magnificent and merciless, where power was maintained not only through legions and laws, but also through spectacle. The origins of gladiatorial combat. Gladiatorial games began not as entertainment, but as ritual. In the earliest days of the Republic, warriors fought to the death during funerals of nobles, their blood offered as tribute to the spirits of the dead. These somber rites were called munera duties, ode to the departed. Over time, the solemn sacrifice transformed into performance. By the late Republic, Rome's politicians discovered that games could do more than honor the dead. They could win the living. Julius Caesar, Pompey, and other ambitious leaders staged massive gladiatorial shows to secure popular support. The transition was complete, from sacred offering to political tool, from private mourning to public spectacle. By the time the Colosseum opened in 80 CE, under Emperor Titus, gladiatorial combat had become one of the defining institutions of Rome. Bread and cases, politics of entertainment. The phrase, panem et circenses, bread and circenses, captures the essence of Roman governance. Emperors provided food for the poor and entertainment for the masses, ensuring loyalty while distracting them from the hardships of empire. Gladiatorial games, staged in colossal amphitheaters, were the centerpiece of this strategy. Tens of thousands filled the seats, their roars echoing across marble and stone. Emperors knew the arena was not merely a place of bloodshed, but of politics. Mercy shown by a ruler could win adoration. Cruelty could instill fear. Every contest was both sport and propaganda, a reminder that the emperor alone held the power of life and death. The social status of gladiators. At the heart of the spectacle stood the gladiators themselves, men trapped in a paradox of fame and shame. Most gladiators were slaves, criminals, or prisoners of war, dragged from distant provinces to fight in Rome's theaters. Yet not all were forced. Some free men, desperate for money or craving fame, sold themselves into the gladiatorial schools. These octorotti signed contracts binding them to a life of combat, swearing to endure burning, beating, and deaths by the sword. Society's view of gladiators was complex. To the common people, they were idols, cheered like modern athletes, their images painted on walls, their names whispered with admiration. Women swooned over them. Even noble ladies were rumored to seek affairs with famous fighters, yet the elite condemned them as dishonorable, tainted by blood and shame. A senator might attend the games, but he would never dine with a gladiator. Life in the ludus behind the glamour of the arena lay the harsh reality of the ludus, the gladiatorial training schools. These institutions were part prison, part barracks, part gymnasium, overseen by the lanista, a harsh master who bought and sold gladiators like livestock. The schools demanded absolute discipline. Gladiators lived under strict rules. Their diets were carefully controlled, often rich in barley, beans, and ash to build stamina and muscle. Training was relentless. Wooden swords gave way to sharpened steel. Drills turned into staged battles. Whips and rods enforced obedience, though they were slaves. Gladiators were valuable commodities. A skilled fighter could bring profit to his lanista and glory to his school. As such, gladiators received medical care, training from experienced veterans, and sometimes even rewards for victory, yet their lives were not their own. The lanista held the right to punish, sell, or kill them at will. The arena, a theater of death. When the day of combat arrived, gladiators entered not merely a fight but a theater. The sand of the arena was soaked in blood from animals and men alike. Trumpets blared, banners waved, and the crowd roared as the gladiators saluted the emperor with the words, Ave Caesar, morituri te, salutant hail Caesar. Those who are about to die salute you, but death was not always certain. Contrary to popular belief, not every match ended in slaughter. Gladiators were expensive investments, and their deaths were not wasted lightly. Many contests were duels of skill, where victory brought honor, and sometimes survival for both fighters. Yet the trial remained brutal. Even if a gladiator fought valiantly, his fate often rested on the whim of the crowd or the gesture of a sponsor. The infamous pollis versatha turned thumb could mean life or death. A skilled fighter might live to see another day, but one unlucky mistake could doom him, regardless of courage. Gladiators as mirrors of Rome. Why did Rome love the games so much? Because gladiators embodied the values the empire claimed to cherish: strength, courage, endurance in the face of death. Yet they also revealed Rome's contradictions. The same society that praised law and civilization reveled in organized slaughter. For emperors, gladiators were both symbols and tools. They projected Rome's dominance over conquered peoples, dramatized in the arena where prisoners of war fought for survival. They reinforced the emperor's image as a godlike figure, presiding over life and death with a mere gesture. The hidden trials await. This is the stage on which the gladiators' hidden trials unfolded. Beneath the roar of the crowd and the glitter of armor lay lives consumed by discipline, humiliation, and fear. The gladiator's existence was not only about surviving the arena, but enduring the daily trials of captivity, the paradox of adoration and contempt, and the constant shadow of death. The Colosseum remains today as a ruin, but its stones whisper of the men who fought and died there not as heroes of choice, but as victims of a society enthralled by blood. To uncover their hidden trials is to see Rome not only at its most magnificent, but also at its most merciless. When we think of gladiators, we imagine the clash of swords and the cheer of the crowd. But their first trials began long before the gates of the arena opened. Hidden from public view, these struggles were fought in training halls, barracks, and even in the hearts of the men condemned to live as Rome's instruments of spectacle. The oath of fire and chains, the initiation into gladiatorial life, was itself a trial. Those who entered, whether as slaves, prisoners, or desperate volunteers, swore a chilling oath to endure burning, beating, and death by the sword. By speaking these words, a man surrendered his autonomy. From that moment on, his body belonged, not to himself, but to Rome and the lanista who trained him. For prisoners of war, this oath was meaningless cruelty. For volunteers, it was the price of ambition. But for all, it was the first step into a life where death was no longer an enemy to be avoided, but a companion to be expected. Trials in the ludus life, in the ludus, the gladiatorial school, was its own torment. Gladiators were housed in barracks, more prison than home. Each cell was small and bare, with iron bars across the windows. Escape was nearly impossible, as the schools were guarded like fortresses. The daily regimen was brutal. Training began before dawn and continued until dusk. Wooden swords were used until arms ached, shields strapped to weary backs until shoulders bled. The lanista and his trainers enforced discipline with whips. A mistake was punished not with correction, but with pain. Food was rationed and carefully controlled. Gladiators were fed a diet heavy in barley and beans, designed to bulk the body and thicken the blood. It kept them alive, but it was monotonous, reminding them daily of their status as commodities. Medical care was both advanced and cruel. Rome's physicians were skilled at treating wounds, but their skill was driven by profit. A wounded gladiator was patched up not for mercy, but for reuse. Survival was not kindness, it was investment. Scandals of exploitation even within the schools, scandals thrived. Lanistae sometimes rented their gladiators out for private entertainments, forcing them to perform mock duels at feasts or degrading spectacles in noble households. Wealthy Romans could bribe trainers to secure a night with a gladiator, exploiting the fighters not just for their blood but for their bodies. These hidden abuses rarely reached the public eye, but they formed part of the silent trials endured by gladiators. To the crowd, they were warriors. Behind closed doors, they were property, used in whatever way their masters chose. Trials of the arena's politics. When gladiators finally entered the arena, their trials did not end with combat. In fact, they often deepened. Marches were not always fair. A fighter might be paired against an opponent far stronger, or even against animals, to guarantee blood for the crowd. The organizers of games sometimes arranged outcomes for political gain, ensuring a favorite lived, condemning another regardless of skill. The scandal lay in the illusion. To the spectators, the arena seemed a stage of valor and honor. In truth, it was a theater of manipulation. Gladiators fought not just opponents, but the invisible hands of politics and money. The trial of mercy, perhaps the cruelest trial, was that of mercy. When a gladiator was defeated, the crowd decided his fate. The sponsor of the games, usually a wealthy politician or the emperor himself, would consult the audience's reaction. Thumbs turned down, or sometimes sideways, could mean death even for a valiant fighter. Imagine the terror of kneeling in the dust, blood dripping from wounds, staring up at the stands where thousands shouted for your life or death. The crowd's whim became the executioner. Even the strongest warrior could fall victim not to skill, but to the appetite for blood. Scandals of adoration and contempt. Gladiators also endured the strange scandal of being both adored and despised. The Roman public loved them, painting their names on walls, wearing amulets with their images, and writing poems about their bravery. Women of noble families secretly sought affairs with them, scandalizing society. Yet at the same time, gladiators were viewed as dishonorable, beneath true citizens. A senator might applaud a gladiator in the arena, but would never treat him as an equal. A woman might risk everything for a gladiator lover, but society condemned such liaisons as disgraceful. This duality, hero to the masses, pariah to the elite, was another hidden trial. Gladiators lived in a limbo where their worth was measured by entertainment, not humanity. First signs of revolt. These early scandals and trials sometimes pushed gladiators to revolt. The most famous was Spartacus, a Thracian warrior who escaped his school at Capua in 73 BCE, alongside dozens of fellow gladiators. He launched a rebellion that grew into a massive slave war against Rome. For 2 years, his army of escaped fighters and slaves defied the legions, exposing the fragility of a system built on exploitation. Though Spartacus was defeated, his revolt revealed the cost of the hidden trials. Gladiators were not simply playthings of the empire. They were men who, when pushed too far, could threaten Rome itself. The unseen burden for every Spartacus, thousands more endured in silence. They bore the hidden trials of the ludes, the humiliations of exploitation, the manipulation of the arena, and the paradox of adoration and contempt. Their struggles rarely made the annals of history. Yet without them, the grandeur of Rome's games would have been impossible. Their bodies paid the price for Rome's spectacle. Their souls bore the weight of its corruption. The life of a gladiator was a journey measured not in years but in wounds. Every scar was a memory. Every breath, a reminder of battles survived. Behind the glamour of the Colosseum lay a constant struggle for endurance, as men endured pain beyond imagination simply to live another day. the pain of the body from the moment training began. The gladiator's body was reshaped by violence. Blisters hardened into calluses, muscles tore and healed, bones cracked beneath the strain of endless drills. Wounds that would cripple ordinary men were patched up by physicians so that fighters could be thrown back into the arena. The medical care given to gladiators was advanced by ancient standards. Rome's surgeons were skilled in setting bones, stitching cuts, and even using herbal anesthetics. But this care was never compassionate, it was pragmatic. A gladiator was an investment, and investments must be preserved. Pain was not a burden to relieve, but a resource to exploit. In the arena, pain became theater. Audiences expected spectacle. The bloodier the wounds, the greater the entertainment. Gladiators were trained not to cry out, not to show weakness. Even as blades sliced flesh or bones shattered, the silence of suffering became its own performance, proof of endurance, proof of Rome's dominance over fear itself. The pain of the mind, perhaps more cruel than the wounds, was the torment of the mind. Every gladiator lived under the shadow of death. Each night in the barracks could be the last. Each morning's drill could precede the final march into the arena. The psychological strain was immense. Some gladiators turned to superstition, carving protective symbols into their weapons, or praying to gods of war. Others drowned fear in wine or sought fleeting comfort in brothels provided by their masters. A few grew numb, embracing fatalism. If death was inevitable, then fear was pointless. Yet fear never vanished entirely. The sound of the crowd chanting for blood, the flash of steel in sunlight, the taste of sand in the mouth, all these haunted gladiators long after battles ended. Survival meant not only enduring the fight, but mastering terror, the paradox of famed foursome. Survival brought an unexpected reward: fame. Victorious gladiators could become household names, celebrated like modern athletes. Their likenesses were painted on tavern walls, etched into oil lamps, or carved into graffiti. Women sent them love notes, sometimes written in blood. But fame was double-edged. The more renowned a gladiator became, the greater the risk he faced. Famous fighters were often matched against stronger opponents to create spectacle. The crowd demanded not only skill but death-defying heroics. The price of glory was greater danger, and even the most beloved could be discarded. A gladiator might thrill the arena for years, only to fall in one unlucky strike, his body dragged away like refuse. Fame offered no shield against mortality. The strategies of survival despite the brutality. Gladiators were not helpless. Many developed strategies to survive. Experienced fighters learned how to play the crowd, exaggerating their moves, prolonging battles to entertain, and earning mercy when defeated. A gladiator who fought bravely and dramatically could sway the audience to spare his life, even in lost. Others mastered the politics of the arena. They cultivated reputations, earned favor with sponsors, or aligned with influential patrons. A lanista might grant privileges to his most profitable fighters, better food, lighter duties, even opportunities for rest. Some gladiators were rewarded with wooden swords, symbols of freedom, after years of service. Yet freedom was rare. Most gladiators died in the arena or in training. Their survival strategies bought time, not escape. Brotherhood in chains. Hidden strength lay in the bonds between gladiators. Though forced to fight each other, they often shared deep camaraderie, training side by side, suffering the same punishments, and living under the same threat. Forged connections as strong as family. Chroniclers speak of gladiators who wept when ordered to kill friends, of fighters who chose mercy even when it endangered themselves. The brotherhood of the ludus offered brief solace in a world that demanded blood, yet this too carried pain. The trial of killing one's own companion was among the cruelest. In the arena, brotherhood could be shattered by a single order, leaving survivors haunted by guilt. Scandals of survival also bred scandals. Some gladiators were accused of cowardice, accused of deliberately losing fights to spare themselves. Others were rumored to bribe laniste for favorable matches. Whispers of fixed battles circulated, staining reputations and angering audiences. But these scandals revealed more than dishonor. They exposed the reality that gladiators were not mindless killers, but men desperate to live. Survival, even at the cost of pride, was its own victory. The price of survival in the end, survival was never without cost. A gladiator who lived long enough bore a body broken by scars, a spirit bent by fear, and a soul marked by shame. Even those who won freedom often found no place in society. To Romans, they remained tainted, men who had killed for spectacle. The wooden sword of freedom was both triumph and tragedy. It meant escape from the arena, but it also meant a life lived in the shadow of blood. Few gladiators who survived long enough to earn freedom could truly leave their past behind. The hidden triumph yet, within this journey of pain lay a hidden triumph. Gladiators endured. They endured the lash, the sword, the scorn of society, and the demands of the mob. They endured not because they chose to, but because survival itself was an act of defiance. Every breath taken after a battle, every scar healed, every dawn survived was a victory, however small. In a world that demanded their deaths, to live another day was the greatest rebellion. Every gladiator's journey eventually reached a climax, the moment when the hidden trials of training, fear, and endurance burst into the open under the eyes of tens of thousands. The arena was the ultimate stage, the theater where survival, humiliation, and death converged in a single instant. The final walk, the climax, began long before the clash of steel. It started in the dim corridors beneath the Colosseum, where gladiators waited for the signal to march. The air was thick with sweat, incense, and dread. Some whispered prayers, others sharpened blades in silence. The trumpets blared. Gates opened. The gladiators stepped into blinding sunlight as the crowd erupted. Above them, tier upon tier of Roman citizens, from senators in marble seats to beggars on wooden benches, leaned forward, hungry for spectacle. Each gladiator saluted the emperor, acknowledging the man who held the power of life and death with a flick of his hand. In that moment, the hidden trials of fear became public. Their lives were no longer their own. Battles staged for blood, though some machas were displays of skill, others were staged for slaughter. Prisoners of war might be thrown against seasoned fighters with no chance of survival. Criminals condemned to die were forced into hopeless battles against beasts. Even trained gladiators could be doomed by politics, paired unfairly to please the crowd, or punished for displeasing their masters. The climax of trials lay not in combat itself, but in its cruelty. Gladiators fought not only with opponents, but with inevitability. The crowd demanded blood, and Rome delivered. Mercy or death, the most dramatic moment came with defeat. A gladiator who fell to his knees awaited judgment. The audience roared, chanting for mercy or death. All eyes turned to the sponsor of the games. His thumb became the arbiter of fate, raised for mercy, lowered for death. This ritual, the polis verso, was the cruel climax of the gladiators' trials. A man's years of training, his courage, his humanity, all reduced to a single gesture. Even victors might die if the crowd thirsted for spectacle. Mercy was never guaranteed. The trial of the victors, even for those who triumphed, the climax carried weight. Victory meant survival, but also expectation. A victor was sent back to the barracks, scarred, exhausted, and knowing he would soon be summoned again. The crowd's cheers faded quickly. Their hunger for blood never waned. Some gladiators fought dozens of times, each bout pushing them closer to death. The climax of their trials was not one battle, but a lifetime of repeated ordeals. The scandal of women and blood among the scandals of the climax was the fascination of Roman women with gladiators. Ancient writers tell of noble ladies who risked reputation to pursue affairs with fighters, drawn by the allure of danger and strength. Some even inscribed names of their favorite gladiators on walls, alongside crude drawings celebrating their virility. This adoration was both a blessing and a curse. It elevated gladiators to celebrity status, but it also fueled contempt among the elite, who viewed such liaisons as disgraceful. The climax of a gladiator's trial thus extended beyond the arena into bedrooms and scandals that shook Roman households. The revolt as climax for some. The ultimate climax was rebellion. Spartacus and his companions, once gladiators in Capua, chose to turn their weapons not on each other but on Rome itself. Their revolt, though doomed, was the most dramatic exposure of the hidden trials. It was proof that gladiators were not mere pawns, but men pushed to desperation. The rebellion's suppression was brutal. Thousands of captured gladiators were crucified along the Appian Way, their bodies lining the road as a warning. It was Rome's final gesture, a reminder that even rebellion would end in spectacle. The audience's blindness, the cruelest climax of all, was the blindness of the crowd. Romans cheered courage, thrilled at blood, and debated mercy, but few saw the hidden trials behind the show. They did not see the barracks, the lash of the trainer, the humiliation in private chambers, or the torment of fear. They saw only warriors, who lived and died for their amusement. In this blindness lay the true tragedy of the gladiators. Their suffering was real, but it was invisible to those who turned it into entertainment. The last trial for most gladiators. The climax ended in silence. Their bodies were dragged from the sand, stripped of armor, and dumped into mass graves. No monuments were built for them. No triumphal arches bore their names. Their trials ended not with honor, but with anonymity, yet their echoes remained. Every scar, every battle cry, every drop of blood shed in the arena whispered of the trials endured. The climax of their suffering became part of Rome's grandeur, but their humanity was lost in the roar of the crowd. The gladiators' hidden trials did not end with their deaths in the arena. Their consequences rippled outward into the lives of those who survived, into the society that consumed their suffering, and into the memory of Rome itself. Though centuries have passed, the legacy of their pain continues to echo in stone. The story and scar. Survivors scarred by battle for the few who lived long enough to earn the rudis, the wooden sword, symbolizing freedom. The aftermath was bittersweet. Freedom meant no longer belonging to the lanista, no longer bound to fight for the crowd's amusement. But it also meant re-entering a society that despised gladiators. Survivors carried scars, visible and invisible. Some were mutilated by wounds that never healed, condemned to live crippled lives. Others bore the psychological torment of years spent waiting for death. Many drifted into obscurity, unable to find honest work, shunned by citizens who saw them as tainted by blood. Freedom was real, but dignity remained elusive. Families and forgotten lives. Behind every gladiator was a family, wives, children, siblings who endured the shame of his profession. Some were enslaved alongside him, others left behind in conquered provinces. Their grief rarely entered the chronicles of history, but it was part of the aftermath. The hidden trials were not only the gladiator's burden. They were borne by those who loved him, Rome's appetite for blood on a broader scale. The gladiatorial system shaped Roman society in profound ways. It conditioned citizens to equate violence with entertainment, to see human suffering as theater. The sight of men bleeding on the sand became as normal as a chariot race or a feast. His appetite for blood desensitized the public. It hardened the Roman heart, teaching generations that cruelty was not only acceptable, but desirable when sanctioned by the state. Emperors exploited this, using the games to distract and pacify the masses. The aftermath of gladiatorial culture was a population bound to power through spectacle, dependent on violence for unity. Political consequences. The games also had political costs. While they reinforced imperial authority in the short term, they drained resources and fed discontent in the long run. Vast sums were spent on staging spectacles, feeding animals, constructing arenas, and paying for fighters. Politicians who failed to provide lavish games risked ridicule, while those who did only deepened Rome's dependence on blood sport. Moreover, the games exposed the fragility of imperial image. Emperors who appeared weak in the arena's judgments, mercy differently, or showing fear lost credibility. Their authority was bound to the same violence they promoted, creating a dangerous cycle of power and blood. The cultural aftermath. Even after gladiatorial combat declined in the 4th and 5th centuries CE, its imprint remained. The Colosseum stood as a symbol of Rome's grandeur, but also its brutality. Christian writers condemned the games as barbaric, pointing to them as proof of Rome's moral decay. By the time the spectacles were banned, the reputation of gladiators had already shifted from entertainers to martyrs of cruelty. Their stories survived in art and literature. Roman mosaics depict them mid-strike, frozen in poses of valor. Graffiti scrawled on ancient walls still proclaim admiration for individual fighters. The paradox of adoration and contempt continued long after the last sword clashed. Cliff says aftermath for Rome was not only cultural but moral. The games taught Rome to glorify strength while mocking weakness, to admire courage while ignoring suffering. They reflected the empire's might, but also revealed its rot. When Rome eventually fell, Later historians pointed to its appetite for spectacle as a symptom of decline, a society too consumed by entertainment to see its own fragility. Modern ethos today. The hidden trials of gladiators still resonate. The Colosseum remains one of the most visited monuments in the world, drawing millions to marvel at its scale. Yet few who walk its ruins can ignore the echoes of screams that once filled the arena. The fascination with gladiators endures in films, books, and games, proof that the allure of spectacle has never left us. But the true aftermath is not entertainment. It is the reminder of what happens when human lives are reduced to spectacle, when suffering is commodified, and when power is exercised without compassion. The final consequence for gladiators themselves, the aftermath, was silence. Their names, save for a few, are lost. Their victories faded, their trials forgotten. Rome remembered its emperors, its generals, its senators. The gladiators who bled for its glory were buried in unmarked graves, their stories swallowed by dust. Yet their legacy persists in the very stones of the Colosseum and in the cautionary tales that followed. They remind us that behind every monument of grandeur lies a hidden cost, measured in human lives. The gladiators of Rome are remembered today as icons of strength, endurance, and defiance. Yet their true legacy is not one of glory, but of sacrifice. Their hidden trials, the pain of training, the fear of the arena, the humiliation of being both idolized and despised, reveal the cost of empire's grandeur. They were not kings or generals, yet they carried the weight of Rome's politics on their shoulders. They were slaves and prisoners, yet their blood bought loyalty for emperors and entertainment for the masses. In their suffering, we see the paradox of Rome itself, a civilization of brilliance built on cruelty. The legacy of gladiators lies in their humanity. Behind the armor and spectacle were men who dreamed, feared, and endured. Some sought freedom, others fame, but all were trapped in a system that turned their lives into theater. Their message is not of conquest, but of the ability to survive in a world designed for their destruction. For Rome, the gladiatorial games were both triumph and downfall. They united the people, but revealed their hunger for blood. They glorified the empire, but exposed its moral decay. When the Colosseum fell silent, it was not because Rome had lost its appetite for spectacle, but because the cost had become undeniable. Today, the ruins stand as a reminder. The sand is gone, the crowds silent, but the echoes remain. The hidden trials of gladiators challenge us to see beyond the spectacle, to remember the lives sacrificed for entertainment, and to question how far societies will go to feed their hunger for power and pleasure. This is their legacy. This is their warning.